What if the sound of a church bell ringing once at midnight was the cry for vengeance rather than a call to prayer? How could the symbol of her enslavement be used as a weapon against her master by a woman who had been hushed all her life? And why do residents still mutter that the bell sounds on its own every New Year's Eve, over a century later? December holds its breath over Anne Arundel County, Maryland, while the year burns low. The frost tobacco rose bristles that have turned gray from sleep. The bitter memory of summer is exhaled by barns. As usual, dawn rings the bell to start the count. Its bronze throat hits the day's rib cage and trembles the cold. Before names are uttered, bodies rise in the quarters. Nobody dares to miss. The overseer's metronome step. Hours are collected by work like taxes, and no receipt is provided. Ruth, who is 22, is well acquainted with the bell. It times her heartbeat, bends her, then straightens her. She's figured out the math of survival. Subtract the witness, multiply the quiet, and divide the suffering. She moves with patience and economy, handling brooms, knives, bales, and buckets, with the attention of someone who knows how to be manipulated to work against her. A map that no seagraver ever sketched is on her back. Ridges, rivers, crossings, routes marked with iron and leather, and days that were broken and never healed. The Whitmore house looms over the fields like a white mask. Its porch serves as a stage where common voices render verdicts, and its windows are alert gaps. Clean cruelty is what Thomas Whitmore likes. A minor adjustment prior to breakfast, AAE, lesson after dinner, as though upholding the rule of law were a duty that maintained a man's dignity. He chooses rather than yells. He refers to Ruth by the name that someone else gave her, and he says it softly, as if the subsequent order were forgiven by the gentleness. The church opens its righteous doors, and the bell chimes twice on Sundays. When no one is around, Ruth polishes that bell by using coarse cloth till her image disappears and trembles in the metal. Like warm fog, scripture wafts from the nave. Verse lengths adjusted for pew comfort. After the amen, she gathers the crumbs and wax, and the floor retains her secrets. A hymn number hangs crookedly on the far wall, as though truth itself were a little off balance. The quarters are quiet at night. Names of those who have disappeared. Mothers are like the weather. Old guys with cataracts remember roots beneath. Stars they can no longer see. Youngsters learn to take questions at face value. Ruth practices sentences that cannot jeopardize the air, saving her voice for the interior of her skull. She mouths to the darkness, "Not forever." To be honest, the darkness does not disagree. Wintertime improves memory. From the large house to the fields, from the fields to the storeroom, and from the storehouse back to the bell, ruts formed by boot prints and snow that comes in fits and starts as thin as old linen. According to the pattern, tomorrow will have the same shape as today. Ruth observes that her hands do not shake when Whitmore comes close, but beneath the surface of habit, something becomes looser, a tiny thread at the hem of fear, pulled by time. When the whip sings for someone else, she observes that her breath stays steady. In any case, she counts the breaths. Rich and buttery laughter erupts from the house on Christmas. A barrel of beef she won't taste smokes in the yard. A dropped bucket turns into a show, a misstep, a theatrical crime. Ruth perseveres while the cold wipes away her tears. She doesn't go down. As if keeping score, the bell rings the hour, and the onlookers retire inside brimming with tales of providence and discipline. The sound is absorbed by the snow until just the ringing is left. The fields turn black as night falls, and far-off fires salt the sky. Ruth appears to be waiting for an unwrapped gift as she rests on her pallet with her palms open. The room's breath is a sluggish creature. After listening to it, she tries to concur by placing her heartbeat next to two clocks. Patient as a debt, the bell rests in its wooden ribs. If there must be a beginning to an ending, it will disguise itself as something commonplace, a recurring idea, or a quiet that eventually responds. Time ebbs and flows between Christmas and the first breath of the year. The plantation carries hangover laughter like glass that could shatter as it treads carefully on its own stillness. Work returns to its usual math, but the figures feel different, as though the scale is being pressed by a thumb. The bell maintains the ledger with an unbiased clang, and Ruth moves where she must, steadfast as a secret. Ceremony is more important to Thomas Whitmore than noise. The morning after a snowfall, he calls her to the yard, but she doesn't want to remain. A dozen faces assemble, collars up, curiosity shining brighter than rage. It's a minor enough. Crime to be helpful. A pail of water spilled, leaving an impudent stain on the porch board. He speaks politely, almost tenderly, and with the patience of a schoolmaster. The lash, which is intended to clarify rather than to yell, appears like punctuation. Ruth endures it without being given permission to fall. The body retains its ability to turn into a wall, mortar of will, bricks of breath. Only the counting she keeps to herself remains as the sound fades from the moment. A bridge she can cross, but numbers that aren't really numbers. The bell marks the hour as if presiding over a contract neither party signed, somewhere beyond the polite brutality and white faces. Later on, she warms the metal beneath her towel by rubbing it in the dark chapel. The ghost of her features, a quivering oval that can't determine whether to exist, is trapped in the metal. Tucked away like a hedge, a lyric about obedience clings in the rafters. Ruth erases the words like she would a blade. Night presses down through friction, patience, and repetition, which educates an edge to remember its purpose. Someone is humming a tune in the quarters that has no melody and a rhythm as old as walking. The stars are listed by their forgotten names by an elder, who then forgets them once more. Ruth doesn't say anything, but she doesn't keep her thoughts to herself. From the door to the walk, from the route to the church, and from the church to the stairway that ascends through timber ribs into a wooden neck, they travel in precise lines, charting distances. The days go by quickly. Whitmore is once again polite, a stain that was nearly cleaned. He likes to refer to her as trustworthy. Men like mirrors, thus he likes that word. He entrusts her with menial duties, such as carrying keys, fetching linens, and doing errands by the chapel when no one is looking. The gesture adorns itself with kindness. Something is inside it. Lazy sleeps. Ruth observes without making contact. At the bell rope, where numerous hands have drawn its voice. Into the air, she observes the chaos. She spots a hole where a knot used to be in the stair rail. She observes that her own fear is acting like an animal that has finally mastered sitting. She folds her hands in the evenings to prevent them from shaking and finds that they don't need to be restrained. As the year draws to a close, a frigid person unexpectedly enters the house. The buddies of Whitmore go back to their homes. The supervisor becomes disinterested. There is a waiting in the quarters that won't give its name. Ruth feels the wick's courageous resistance to the wind as she carries a candle across the yard. It creates a narrow sphere of power and invites her to enter. The bell, soft as a lie, sings twice on the final Sunday. She lingers after worship, breathing, counting, and polishing. The bronze merely retains her reflection long enough to prove her existence, which is all that is necessary for a beginning. Outside, frost has frozen the fields into rigidity. Inside, a notion tightens its grip around her spine till it feels like the truth to stand up. A road is only dirt, yet a bell is simply metal, a rope is only fiber, and a staircase is only wood. Even yet, it leads to an unexpected place. As the year comes to an end, the county is plagued by the night of its death hour. Arriving covered with frost is New Year's Eve. With the exception of the restless hum of the wind tearing through the tobacco stalks that had been left to rot, the fields were frozen in solitude. Firelight and intoxicated reality fill the Whitmore. Residents. With coats thick, voices louder than the walls, and laughter as sticky as syrup, the guests stagger in. While slaves wait at the edges, servers dart between tables with platters of meat and kegs of liquor. It takes shadows to smile, without grinning. Wine, cigar smoke, and the appearance of permanence fill the air. Ruth moves between them. Her face was a stone-smooth mask. She is holding dishes that only tremble when no one is looking. Beneath her skin, like a coal that will not cool, is the recollection of her punishment. She remains silent despite the fact that every insult and every bit of amusement directed at her still stings. Sweat is all that is hanging around her neck. Even though her body has become accustomed to feeling shackles around her wrists, she will not be wearing them tonight. She listens instead of talking. As her owner walks around the guests with a smile too fake to be true, she counts his steps. The hours pile up like bricks in a wall as the night drags on. The sound of the midnight worship bell is drowned out by cheers and music. Whitmore consumes alcohol, profoundly, boasting of crops, order, and discipline. Over the fiddles, his laughter rises. Ruth watches him, the way his jaw curves as he sneers, the way his gait wobbles as the wine eats away at his equilibrium. The vulnerability beneath his control is not perceived by the guests. However, she does. She carefully marks it, as if marking a door that could open with the right hand. A toast is made to wealth, the land, and the years to come as the hour of midnight approaches. The air grows sharper, candles gutter, glasses clink, and voices rise. For too long, Ruth imagines that the bell is announcing a new covenant. The rope is already strung, and her master's body is already hanged. The taste lingers after she blinks, but the vision disappears. Metallic, sure, unavoidable. The audience erupts with the stroke of 12. Boots thumping on wood, shouts, embraces, and inebriated kisses. Ruth senses the year being reborn in solitude, but it is reborn in noise. The hall trembles with joy as she retreats into the shadows. Whitmore's cup spills on the rug as he stumbles, flushed and swaying. He demands more music, more wine, and more evidence of his power. Nobody can see the storm that has had decided on a path. Outside, the ground becomes glassy due to frost. The air becomes white with breath. At the border of the plantation, the chapel is a somber sentinel. Its tower is pointing upward toward judgment like a finger. The bell waits silently inside, its ribs, its rope hanging in anticipation. With a serene heart and clear vision, Ruth presses her feet against the ice ground. Evident, she no longer shudders. Time itself seems to pause, holding its breath for what must come next, as the night bends to her pace. The Whitmore home behind her continues to resound with intoxicated delight, a world intoxicated by its own brutality. The stairway ahead of her ascends into the dark, a passageway that leads not only upward but also inward, into the center of something that has been postponed for a long time. The rope awaits hands with too much experience. Enslavement. And those hands no longer. Reject function. Ruth is carrying the weight of decision, heavier than iron, sharper than justice, and as certain as the frigid moon that watches without sympathy in the first hour of the year. With a groan that is more appropriate for wood than for conscience, the chapel door gives way. The smell of ancient prayers and cold iron fills the air inside. She has to go through the rib cage of the tower's stairway, which spirals upward, one bone at a time. Ruth holds the rope against her forearm in a loop. Its threads are as rough as a history discovered by touch. Every step has a whisper response, and when the whisper is counted, the counting gets quiet. Where darkness maintains its watch, she discovers the bell waiting. Her fingers instinctively check the rope that has already been knotted to the yoke, sensing the location where numerous hands have pleaded with the metal to talk. She gauges distances without taking any measurements. The height of the beam, the drop below the trapdoor, and the route a body would take if gravity ordered it to confess. After labor, wind cools by passing through a slit like a thin blade. She hears it the way a patient hears a doctor's office clock. Below, the sound of laughter untangles into a single sound. A door slams. On icy ground, boots pause. Like a forgotten gift, Thomas Whitmore emerges in the nave, shaky and self-satisfied, holding a cup rim that slices a bright half-moon. He utters a name as though calling forth a dog, then reconsiders and grins at the pews for fully comprehending. Him. The stare is not met by the smile. Ruth takes one flight down, pausing where the last of the candle scent is swallowed by shadow. Her tone is steady, a silence that creates space rather than absorbs it. Encouraged by the trickery of the wine and the life that has never corrected him, he follows because he always has. Wood makes a minor complaint. The glare takes their weight, and, like all complaints, it is disregarded. He tries to give a speech at the belfry. Formalities claw at dignity that has slipped its tether when words jumble. He reaches for support and looks into her eyes for the first time, as though it were a wall instead of a door. Like an unspoken sentence, the rope waits between them. Ruth walks past him without hurrying or moving slowly, and she places the coil where it needs to be, over beam, through hand, around the neck that has rendered so many decisions. Startled to discover that her name is still hers, he repeats it. He starts to object in the ownership grammar. Final, unexamined, and reflexive. The statement is edited into breath by the cold. Rather than contradicting herself, Ruth responds, with silence, which is more comprehensive. Her hands recall the weight of blades, bundles, and buckets. They do not shudder as they become used to the new weight. She pulls till the rope's thin, fibrous tongue speaks. A deliberate shift, a slight step back. One flawless accomplishment that embodies the patient labor of a life. The order is completed by gravity, the devoted servant. What is offered is received by the hatch's trap. The night loses its etiquette for a moment. The bell rings, rolling across houses and fields, one note after another, across sleepers who will not understand the language of this sound. A call to worship is not what it is. It's not a warning. It is a bronze representation of a reckoning. The wind is where dogs start their arguments. A window opens in one place, and a prayer fragments in another. The rope slackens in Ruth's hands as she stands. Slow packages of breath that she can carry away. The air has an aged and frosty fragrance. Metal. The memory of the calm stripes burns in her back. Her expression displays a firmness that has at last found its purpose, but no signs of triumph. As though shutting a book, the bell's tongue trembles again, but this time it's milder. She lets what must hang, and lowers what must be lowered. Under her feet, the step unwinds, allowing her to pass without hesitation. Within the nave, benches continue to pay attention to an unidentified absence. She is welcomed by the door, which brings her back to the icy white teeth of winter. Footprints move toward the ground's shadowy perimeter, prints that are aware of when to disappear. The bell behind her tells the time for those who will wake up and interpret the hour as a warning or a transgression. The road ahead splits into options that aren't yet roads. Ruth travels in a silence that is hers, not borrowed, not allowed. That information serves as the basis for the night's reconstruction and retention. Dawn comes without fanfare. The Whitmore mansion is oddly quiet in the first light as the frost clings to the fields like a shroud. With their ears still ringing from the noise that shattered the night, servants within stir uneasily. Some claim that even though no hand was there, the bell tolled there to call it forth. Some whisper that it rang not for worship but for death. A dirge formed out of its bronze voice. Discovery spreads before questions arise. In the belfry, hovering between heaven and earth, Thomas Whitmore's body rotates in time with the steady cadence of quiet. When the overseer yells for order, his words disperse like scared birds. Excuses are whispered by guests as they get ready to go. Before the sun rises, their vehicles are called and their cheeks are pale. The myth, rehashed with deliberate omissions and half-truths, has already started its migration by midday. According to some, Whitmore was a fool who fell in while intoxicated and got entangled in the rope. Others say that it was the unassailable heavenly hand of judgment. Ruth is never mentioned, yet her absence taints the smoke is lighter than air. The terror grows in the quarters. People accuse men and women who didn't see anything of seeing too much. Even dread cannot summon a name that no one is willing to utter, despite the threat of the lash. Ruth's cot is frigid, her little possessions unaltered. She disappeared into the woods, children whisper, wandering silently, her shadow longer than her body. According to an elder, he had a dream about a figure moving north, led by stars obscured by the murk of winter. But since certainty has left the plantation with her, no one can be sure. The bell tower is deserted. The weight of the rope has left scars on its beams. Some people stay away from the chapel completely because they say that the air inside trembles at night, as though memory itself wouldn't sleep. The church prays more loudly than usual the next Sunday, but tension seeps into each and every word. Nobody offers to ring the bell when it's time. The rope remains unaltered, a reminder that it's too close and too unvarnished. Nevertheless, the bell groans again as dusk spreads across the county, unaffected by any hands in sight. Its voice reverberates, breaking the stillness and clamoring for everyone's attention. Narratives start to spread like vines. A tourist going through. According to Maryland, a woman was spotted getting on a wagon with her hands scarred and her face obscured. Another insists that she follow the unseen road that leads north, the one that is guarded by people who refuse to wear shackles and is paved with covert messages. However, there are also more sinister stories. In some unnamed hole, whispers that she was apprehended and silenced. The ice took her bones away. Only hearsay emerges to respond as truth retreats behind a curtain. As the years pass, the recollection remains firmly in place. The county's children are raised to hear that the bell occasionally rings on New Year's Eve on its own, a leisurely toll that reverberates through the night. People claim that the sound makes their hearts tight, stops them from talking, and reminds them of unpaid bills. Despite her face being obscured by shade, several people say they have seen a figure going through the trees in an upright, steady, and leisurely manner. It's obvious. When she was a slave, they called her by a name they were afraid to use. The Whitmore estate shrinks, its fields become unyielding, and its reputation is tarnished. However, the legend lives on, with the earth remembering more than humans would like. The cracked and corroded bell is silent during the day. However, every winter as the year gets ready to change, those who are passing by the chapel stop and listen, because in the paused moment between the past and the future, Ruth is described as walking once more, unbound and unbroken, yet bearing the quiet that once responded. The truth that no master can mute and no amount of time can erase is contained in that silence, which is heavier than iron and sharper than judgment.